They stole human nanotech. It began terraforming their planet into Earth. The raid on the series' deep research annex took 11 minutes, which the Kethrani strike team considered a point of professional pride. They had studied the facility's rotation schedules for 4 months, mapped its security corridors from stolen blueprints, and timed their entry to a maintenance window nobody outside the facility's own staff was supposed to know existed. What they left with, sealed inside a shielded transport case no larger than a human torso, was a single prototype canister labeled in Terran script that none of the strike team could read but that their intelligence division had assured them, with great confidence, contained the single most valuable piece of Terran technology currently in active development. Commander Kethrani did not ask what the canister actually did before ordering the extraction ship to translate. That question, she had decided months earlier, was for the scientists back home to answer. Her job was to get it there intact, and she had done exactly that, and when the extraction ship dropped out of translite above the Kethrani homeworld of Asheville 18 hours later, she felt the particular satisfaction of a soldier who had completed a mission other people would spend years studying. The canister went straight to the Kethrani Ministry of Advanced Systems, where a research team of 11 scientists spent 3 days simply trying to determine what it was before anyone dared open it. The casing was inert to every scan they ran, unresponsive to radiation, temperature, and pressure testing, and gave no indication of active power draw of any kind, which was, Dr. Pralven would later admit, exactly the detail that should have worried him more than it did. "It's not a weapon," Then told the assembled Ministry Council on the 3rd day, holding the sealed canister up for the recording feed. "Weapons announce themselves, even inert ones. This reads as completely passive. We believe it's some kind of storage or seed unit. Possibly biological. Possibly something entirely outside our current framework." He set the canister down carefully on the containment table. "Recommendation is controlled activation in an isolated test zone. If it does nothing, we've lost a few days. If it does something, we want to be watching from a safe distance when it happens." The Council approved the test within the hour, eager for results they could bring back to the war effort against the Terran colonies pressing at Asheville's border systems. The isolated test zone selected was a wide stretch of Asheville's northern barrens, chosen specifically because nothing of value grew there, a gray expanse of cracked mineral flats that had never supported anything more complex than hardy lichen in the planet's entire recorded geological history. Then activated the canister himself, from a monitoring bunker 4 kilometers away, at 0600 local time on the 4th day. For the first 11 hours, nothing visible happened at all. The canister's internal readings showed a faint but steady energy signature, and passive scans of the surrounding barrens showed no measurable change. Then logged the results as inconclusive and went to sleep expecting to write a mildly disappointing report the next morning. He woke to a research assistant shaking him urgently awake, and a live feed on the bunker's main display that made him forget, for several seconds, how to form a complete sentence. The gray mineral flats of the northern barrens had turned green. Not everywhere, not all at once, but in a spreading ring roughly 2 kilometers across, centered precisely on the canister's original position, something had taken root in soil that had never, in the planet's entire geological record, supported anything resembling vegetation. Then's team ran atmospheric composition scans within the hour and found oxygen levels inside the affected zone measurably higher than the surrounding barrens, along with trace humidity readings that made no sense given Asheville's arid climate and had certainly not been present 12 hours earlier. "It's not a weapon and it's not a seed unit," Then said slowly, staring at the readout with the particular dawning horror of a scientist realizing his own initial assessment had been catastrophically incomplete. "It's a terraforming platform. A distributed one. Nanoscale, self-replicating, and it's using our own soil composition as raw material to build something that isn't native to this planet at all." "Build what, exactly?" the ministry liaison asked over the calm, his voice tight. Then pulled up a comparative atmospheric model, cross-referencing the readings against every planetary survey record the Kethrani Intelligence Division had ever compiled on Terran worlds, and felt his stomach drop as the model resolved into an uncomfortably precise match. "Sir, these atmospheric ratios, this soil chemistry, this exact humidity curve, it's not building something new. It's replicating Terra's own baseline ecology, down to specific measurable parameters. Whatever the system was designed to do, it's turning our northern barrens into a scale copy of Earth." By the 6th day, the affected zone had expanded to nearly 9 kilometers across, and the growth inside it had stopped resembling anything Kethrani botanists recognized from their own world's flora. Broadleaf trees unlike anything in Asheville's fossil record rose in dense clusters near the zone's center. Insects that matched no catalogued Kethrani species had begun appearing at the growth's edges, tiny and industrious and entirely unbothered by a planet that had never produced anything like them before. A research drone sent into the deep interior of the zone returned footage of small mammals moving through underbrush that had not existed 9 days earlier, and the footage, when Then finally worked up the nerve to compare it directly against archived Terran wildlife documentation, matched close enough to be unsettling. The Ministry Council convened an emergency session on the 8th day, and for the first time since the Canister's arrival, the mood in the chamber had shifted from cautious optimism to something considerably closer to alarm. "Shut it down," Councillor Draithvos demanded, slamming a clawed hand against the table. "Whatever this thing is doing, stop it before it spreads further." "We've tried," Then said quietly. "There's no external control interface. No shutdown signal it responds to. No power source we can physically isolate, because the system isn't drawing power from anything centralized anymore, it's harvesting energy directly from ambient sunlight and geothermal gradient across the entire affected zone, the same way any established ecosystem does. It's not a machine we captured anymore, councillors. It's a biosphere, and biospheres don't have off switches." It was Commander Thren, seated near the back of the chamber, who finally asked the question that had been sitting unspoken beneath the entire session. Could this have been intentional? Could the Terrans have known we would take that canister, and built it specifically to do this if we did? Then considered this for a long moment before answering, turning the question over with the particular discomfort of a scientist who suspected he already knew the answer and did not want to be the one to say it aloud. "The facility we raided wasn't heavily defended, Commander. At the time, we assumed that meant it was low priority. We assumed the true value of the target justified taking the risk despite the light security, because a facility that important should have been better guarded, and its apparent vulnerability read to us as an opportunity rather than a warning." He looked at the growing green ring on the display, now visible even from low orbital imaging as an unmistakable dark patch against Asheville's pale surface. "I think we may have had that assessment backwards from the very beginning." In the second week, before the council fully grasped the scope of what was happening, a field team was dispatched to physically retrieve samples from the growth's leading edge, both to study the phenomenon directly and to reassure a nervous public that the situation remained under control. The team's lead biologist, a meticulous younger scientist named Corin Adele, spent 6 hours cataloging specimens before radioing back a report that unsettled Then more than anything the remote sensors had shown. "Dr. Then, I need you to look at something." Adele's voice carried the particular strain of someone trying to sound calmer than she felt. "The soil samples from the growth boundary aren't just supporting new plant life. They're actively converting. I pulled a core sample 8 meters outside the visible growth line, in soil that looks completely untouched, and it's already showing microbial populations that don't match anything in our baseline geological survey. Whatever this system is, it's not spreading at the visible edge we can see. It's already ahead of us underground, converting the substrate before the surface growth ever catches up to it." "How far ahead?" Then asked, already knowing he wasn't going to like the answer. "Best estimate, maybe 2 to 3 kilometers ahead of the visible boundary, and expanding." "Dr. Then, this isn't a garden spreading outward from a seed. This is closer to an infection, if I'm being honest, except an infection that produces breathable air and arable soil instead of illness. I don't know if that makes it better or worse." A pause, filled with the ambient sound of insects that hadn't existed on Asheville 2 weeks earlier. "I don't think we're going to be able to draw a containment line around this in any way that actually holds." Then relayed Adele's findings to the council the following morning, and it was this report, more than any single image or sensor reading, that finally convinced the chamber's remaining skeptics that the situation had moved entirely beyond the category of manageable scientific curiosity. By the third week, the zone had grown to over 60 kilometers across, no longer expanding in a clean ring but spreading along river valleys and mineral-rich soil corridors with the patient, unstoppable logic of a system that had all the time in the world and no reason to hurry. Kethrani military engineers attempted 3 separate interventions: controlled fire, designed to burn the growth back to bare mineral flat, which the terraformed ecosystem absorbed and regrew from within days, the ash itself apparently serving as fertile ground for the next growth cycle. Chemical defoliant, which killed a narrow band of vegetation at the zone's edge before the surrounding growth simply routed around the dead patch entirely, as if the whole system had noted the damage and adjusted. And finally, a targeted orbital strike on the presumed original activation site, which destroyed a crater of ground roughly a kilometer wide and accomplished nothing measurable at all, because by that point the terraforming process no longer had any single point of failure to strike. It had become the landscape itself. A message arrived on an open frequency during the 4th week, routed through channels the Kethrani Communications Division could not trace to any registered relay, addressed directly to the Ministry Council by name. The voice, when they finally agreed to play it in full session, was calm, unhurried, and distinctly Terran. This is Dr. Amara Osei, Lead Systems Architect, Series Deep Research Annex. I understand you're having some difficulty with a piece of equipment your strike team removed from our facility 5 weeks ago. I want to be upfront with you, that facility's security was never intended to stop a determined raid. It was intended to make a determined raid look successful. The platform you're currently unable to shut down is an adaptive terraforming seed, designed for slow, permanent, irreversible ecological conversion of hostile or contested territory, and it was specifically engineered without a remote deactivation function, because a terraforming platform that can be switched off by whoever plants it isn't actually a deterrent. It's a suggestion. We wanted something that couldn't be undone once it started, so that any party considering theft would understand the stakes before they acted, not after. A pause, unhurried. I'll be honest, counselors, we expected you to run more analysis before activating it. We didn't expect you to have it running within 4 days of extraction. That's on us to account for in future design work, and I do apologize for how quickly this escalated for you. The council chamber sat in stunned silence for several seconds before Counselor Voss found his voice. You're telling us this was a trap? That you built a weapon specifically designed to be stolen? I'm telling you it was a message, Osei's voice replied. We've watched 3 Terran border colonies get raided for technology in the last 2 years alone. We got tired of losing research to theft, so we started seeding a small number of facilities with equipment specifically designed to punish whoever stole it, in a way that couldn't simply be reverse engineered, contained, or weaponized against us. You have a spreading, self-sustaining, unshutdownable Earth analog ecosystem taking root on your homeworld right now, Counselor, and the honest answer is that there is no version of this conversation that ends with us giving you a way to stop it. That capability was never built into the system in the first place. Then what do you want? Thren said quietly, echoing, without realizing it, a question that would become something of a pattern across 100 negotiations like this one in the years that followed. I want you to understand what happens to anyone who steals from us going forward, Osei said. And I want your government to formally withdraw its raiding operations from every Terran research facility along the border, effective immediately, in exchange for the one thing we can actually offer you, full technical documentation on how to live alongside what's currently growing on your northern continent, rather than fighting a war against it you cannot win. It's not going away, counselors. But it doesn't have to be your enemy either, if you're willing to stop treating theft as strategy. The Council's withdrawal order went out within 6 hours, the fastest unanimous decision in the Ministry's recorded history. By the end of that year, the terraformed zone on Asheville's northern continent had stabilized at just under 400 kilometers across, a permanent green scar of unmistakably Terran biology grafted onto an alien world, and Kethrani agricultural teams, working from the documentation Osei's people eventually did provide, had begun cautiously cultivating its edges rather than fighting them. Dr. When walked the boundary of the zone himself 18 months after the initial theft, standing at the exact line where Asheville's native gray mineral flats gave way to unmistakably earth-green undergrowth, and found himself thinking, not for the first time, that his own government had spent 4 months planning a raid meticulous enough to steal a weapon, and had spent none of that time considering that the weapon might have been planning for them right back. We keep assuming the valuable thing is the thing we can carry away, he said quietly to the young researcher standing beside him, watching insects that had not existed on this world 2 years earlier moving busily through undergrowth that had not existed either. We never stop to ask what happens after we've carried it. The Terrans clearly did. That's the part one don't think we understood about them until it was already growing in our own soil. The young researcher, Adele, who had gone on from her field survey work to become the ministry's leading authority on the converted zone, looked out over the tree line for a long moment before answering. Do you think they have more of these seeded somewhere? Other facilities, other canisters, just waiting for someone to make the same mistake we did? Then considered the question the way he had come to consider most things since the raid, carefully, and without the easy confidence he'd once brought to his work. I think that's precisely the point, Corin. We'll never know until it happens, and neither will anyone else who's currently drawing up plans to raid a Terran research facility somewhere along the border. That uncertainty is the actual weapon. The zone behind us is just the proof it works. He turned to walk back toward the transport waiting at the boundary road, the green line of unmistakably foreign biology stretching wide and patient behind them under Asheville's pale sun. Osei told the council she wanted us to understand what happens to anyone who steals from them. I don't think she meant just us anymore. I think every government watching this story spread across the news networks over the last 18 months has understood it exactly as well as we have, and I suspect that was the entire design from the very first canister onward. Reports would surface, in the years that followed, of 2 other border governments quietly abandoning raid operations against Terran facilities without ever publicly explaining why, and though no official confirmation was ever offered, the pattern was not lost on the analysts who tracked it. Nobody wanted to be the next case study standing at the edge of a slowly spreading, unmistakably foreign forest, wondering how much of their own homeworld they had already lost before they even knew the theft had succeeded.